Hokage-sama, it's horrible. Shizune was almost panicked at the news she bore, and as Tsunade's brow furrowed in puzzlement, her first apprentice blurted out the rest of it. Sakura reported in, Uchiha Sasuke didn't show up for training like he always does, and the Anbu and Inuzuka trackers have found signs of a disturbance. We think he's been kidnapped. This couldn't have happened at a worse time. Most of her jonin were busy on other assignments. Kurenai and Anko were supervising the academy field trip. Kakashi was on another mission, and someone waltzes into Konoha and abducts the last of the Uchiha, taking down the gate guards on the way out. They were just lucky the kidnappers were more interested in escape than witnesses, or she'd have 2 dead jonin on her hands. Tsunade wasted no time in mustering the troops. Calling in a fresh chunin to head this squad was a necessity she'd have preferred to avoid. Nara Shikamaru, your mission is as follows. Sometime last night, Uchiha Sasuke was taken from Konoha, presumably against his will. You are in charge of assembling a team to get him back, by force if necessary. I have no jonin available, and there's only a handful of battle-ready chunin. She handed him a list. You may select your retrieval squad from these, as well as any promising genin you are aware of. Any questions? For once, the lazy Nara was serious, without a scrap of hesitation. No. Hokage-sama. He was already forming a team in his head. A glance at the scroll showed that 2 of the 3 chunin were available. Shino was off the active duty roster until he replenished his colony's losses, apparently. At home, Naruto and Hinata were eating breakfast as Shikamaru arrived. The Hokage has a mission for you 3, he said, and time is short. Let's go. We need to get a couple of others. They went with a grim silence. Ginkumo Kura still wasn't used to the way this Hittite sat, but he knew what Shikunshi-sensei would want him to do. If the only person to beat me at shogi says he needs my talents, who am I to say otherwise? Shaking the last chip from the packet, Shikamaru was braced and ready as Choji sailed past him, snatching both packet and chip. As his best friend chomped down on it, Shikamaru explained the situation as they all ran for the scene of the crime. So whoever these goons are, they got in, snatched Sasuke, and got out, taking down 2 jonin swordsmen to do it. Naruto double-checked as they arrived at the alley where the Anbu had traced Sasuke to. They'd have to be strong then. He sniffed the air, breathing deep to catch any scent in the area. I've got his smell, but it's like they dunked him in something weird, smells of grease and old blood. There were 4 of them. One's a girl and they all have some kind of strange smell to them. Like Sasuke's curse mark actually. Kura and Shikamaru glanced at each other, and the same question ran through each of their minds, although the Nara chunin was the one to ask it. Can you follow their scents? Naruto glared at them. Does Tsunade-sama hit like an elephant? In her office, the Hokage sneezed, and Shizune made a note to get her some cold medicine, just in case. The 4 of them had paused to rest. Jirobo had set down the giant bucket-shaped container that hid their captive from the world, but the solid darkness inside it would have been off-putting enough on its own to cause questions, even if those 2 jonin hadn't caught them red-handed dosing the Uchiha boy and slapping Orochimaru's seal-breaking tag on his curse mark. They'd been pushed hard, and actually had to draw on the second stage of their curse marks. Jirobo was the best off out of them, with Tayuya a close second, but Kidomaru and Kimimaro were both wiped. The multi-armed Shinobi and the Bone Wielder had been the ones hardest pressed in that scuffle, and while Kidomaru was recovering nicely, Kimimaro's illness was taking its toll on him, dragging out his pain in a coughing fit that brought up blood with each racking convulsion. Yet, they dared not stop for long. Shikamaru had laid out the pursuit plan, with Naruto on point. He was scouting out the trail, and Shikamaru was next in line to adjust the plan and issue commands as needed. Then there was Kura with Choji and Atome flanking him, for the combination of traps and heavy hitters, and Hinata brought up the rear with her Byakugan covering the entire group and surrounding area. For a couple of miles, tearing through the trees at the rapid pace they'd set was easy enough, and it seemed that the kidnappers were making for the northern borders, in the region of Ta no Kuni. They'd been going for a few hours when Hinata called that she'd spotted the Oto ninja, and Naruto halted as they set their plans for the intercept. I can't see Sasuke, Hinata pointed out, but they do have a tub that would be large enough to carry him that's sealed solid. There's 4 of them. A large man, bigger than an Akamichi, another with 6 arms, a girl with some kind of metal hat, and the last one has white hair and dense chakra centered on his skeleton. The group looked at Naruto for a moment and he shrugged. He could be the one Orochimaru used me to try to cure, but I can't be sure, the blonde Jinchuriki said. So who gets who? Shikamaru thought for a moment, setting his fingers in the odd position he used to focus his mind. The big guy. There has to be more to him than just size. But he's definitely the heavy on their team. Choji, Atome, he's yours. These guys are all at least Chunin level, so 2 Genin for one of them is a good plan, and then you catch up once he's dealt with. The guy with the arms. Weapons most likely, and he probably plays on his resemblance to a spider, too. Kura, Hinata, the 2 of you take him down. The girl is probably the least troublesome, so I call dibs on her. I'm fairly sure I can hold her long enough for someone to back me up. That leaves the last one for Naruto to renew his acquaintance with. Other than that, the plan is simple. Live, and bring our friend home. The Konoha ninja were fresher as they continued to close the distance between the 2 groups, and the Oto shinobi had already used their curse marks, a fatiguing enterprise and without sufficient rest, it was telling. In desperation the Oto elites spread out, coming to rest in a scattered formation guarding the tub. As the Konoha shinobi arrived, they were surrounded, and Jirobo struck both his hands on the ground and drove his chakra into a doton, the mud dome prison, catching all the ninja in the globe of dirt which promptly began to drain away their chakra. I'll finish them, he told his allies, and then I'll catch up. Wait a second, where'd they go? Panicked, the over-large ninja began to look around as the Konoha shinobi emerged from hiding in the branches, surrounding their would-be ambushes. Choji and Atome sprang down to the ground, Atome assuming her skin of stone form even as she began the chakra manipulation for Stone Bear, as the plan called for. You might have a little problem with your plans right now, Shikamaru said. How about you undo those seals and let us take Sasuke back to Konoha? It'll be less troublesome than having to fight to the death. Several hurled kunai whistled past the lazy genius. I guess that's a no. As Jirobo charged towards the tree with Shikamaru in it, and Atome and Choji moved to intercept, Kimimaro grabbed up the tub with Sasuke in it and began the dash to the north, with Tayuya and Kidomaru in close pursuit. A quick glance down let Shikamaru see Choji's thumbs up, and the group left the 2 embattled shinobi to fight their mammoth opponent as they continued the chase. As the rest of the group got into motion, the 2 ninja left to fight the massive Jirobo prepared themselves for a hard fight. The Oto nin sneered. You do realize they've sacrificed you, right? He taunted them. They have left the weakest of you to face me, gambling that they can stop the others before I can finish you. Choji snarled. Because he was bigger than most kids his age, people assumed he was fat and thus weak. He was willing to bet that the same people, or the same kind of people, at least, would assume that Otome's petite frame meant she was weak too. He was just going to have to show this guy he was wrong the hard way. Yup. Atome said, startling Choji. They left the 2 weakest of us behind, to deal with you. I think that Shikamaru kid was being careful. I can probably take you myself, but he had Choji back me up, 'cause you can never guess what an enemy is capable of. Your best plans, they never survive contact with the enemy. But to you, we're the enemy. She braced her stance, dropping both fists to her hips, elbows back, as if chambering for a basic taijutsu attack, and up the cycling of her chakra to reinforce the muscles, tendons and bones. Jirobo closed and got his hand on her head, beginning to squeeze, and Choji pumped chakra into his right arm for his partial expansion, driving his now massive fist, the size of that tub from earlier, into Jirobo's ample gut. The muscle under the layer of fat, which as he suspected was thinner than it looked, was hardened, so it was like hammering a blow into the oak training posts in the training grounds. But then, Choji had broken those before, and Jirobo hadn't been expecting such an effective hit at this time. As the larger man crumpled, he tightened his grip. If he could kill this girl quick, he could turn his attention to the little butterball and wipe him out. The grisly-sounding snap that sounded made Choji wince, and Jirobo grinned, until the pain reached his brain, when he cried out. The girl had reached up and broken his thumb. Forced to release her, the big man stumbled back, using his other hand to quickly set the injured digit as the girl assumed an odd combat stance. The Akamichi boy glanced at his fellow Konoha ninja, her skin gleaming like stone in sunlight as she took the main stance of the Stone Bear style. Her skin of stone Kekkei Genkai worked well with the chakra cycling techniques she'd described to her new team, and with Hinata's assistance, she'd actually demonstrated one of the style's advantages. Through the cycling of chakra through the physical body, instead of the chakra coils, it became virtually impossible for such techniques and styles as the gentle fist to target the tenketsu and or vital organs, due to the constantly shifting shield of chakra that filled her skin. Indeed, she was working on surpassing her father, the stone bear himself. And he realized another advantage she had right now. With her chakra under such tight self-control, it would be very difficult for this Jirobo to pull it away to devour himself. Atome had seen Choji's techniques in their training sessions and on the shared missions, and had idly wondered about the ways such techniques could be blended with the stone bear techniques. She'd come to the conclusion that the increased area would be too difficult to control the chakra flow over. An idea struck her as their opponent began to attack again, black lines beginning to extend from his curse mark. Stepping behind Choji, she snapped out the basic plan. Choji, human boulder, spin as fast as you can, she said, grasping his shoulders and stepping up her chakra flow. He didn't fully understand why, but the young Akamichi complied, feeling the extra weight of his teammate as a little extra, while powering towards Jirobo. A little before impact, he felt Otome's hands release his shoulders as she allowed herself to be hurled at the larger Oto ninja at the high speeds that Choji's technique had imparted, screaming out, Uzumaki combination, Akamichi catapult. And flipping and twisting to lead with her heel in a spinning version of the stone bear axe kick that drove the huge man to the ground, a significant divot in his forehead, his eyes already crossed and glazing over. But the sheer power of the maneuver had a price, and the sickening crack as even her heavily reinforced, by both the stone bear techniques and her Kekkei Genkai, leg broke. Her thigh had given way at the same time as her shin, and tumbling across the ground didn't help. If anything it hurt more. Choji maintained his human boulder for a little longer as he ground Jirobo's body into the dirt, releasing the jutsu as he reached a barely conscious Atome. Why'd you do that? He demanded of her. We could have beat him without that kind of move. He was forced to hush by the girl's hand as she dropped her own techniques. Because by the time we'd taken him down he'd have us both exhausted and hurt, and neither one of us would be able to get the other back to Konoha. She gasped as he lifted her, almost passing out from the pain. She was fairly sure she shouldn't be seeing her bone sticking out of her thigh like that, and barely managed the next words before blacking out. It could have taken days for someone to find us, but this way. Choji looked down at his friend. The girl from Iwa had grown on him, and Ino loved having someone to shop with besides Sakura. Looking in the direction the retrieval squad had gone in, he whispered a few words before racing back towards Konoha. Good luck, all of you, I'll catch up soon. Kimimaro cursed as he and his companions raced through the trees. The brats split up, he told them. 2 of them stopped to hold back Loudbutt, and the rest are on our trail. Kimimaro frowned. He was weakening more quickly, and with recent events in Konoha, this boy may well be Lord Orochimaru's last chance to get those Uchiha eyes. And you would then recommend? He asked, fighting back the urge to cough. I'll set a trap to catch some, and a bit further on, Tayuya peels away to catch the rest. That should give you enough lead time to get the target to Orochimaru-sama. It wasn't a complex plan, and there was no way to make it foolproof. If only they'd still had Seiken and Yukon. Hinata spotted the explosive tags well ahead of their position, and unleashed her kunai and shuriken to detonate them, and the group landed in the clearing to regroup. It was at that point that Kidomaru's trap went off, and a web of strange silk-like material sprang up around them. As Kidomaru had planned, the pursuers were stuck, but they did not stay that way. Lightning chakra crackled on the soles of Kura's feet, and his kunai lashed out in a blur, severing the silk around Shikamaru and Naruto, while Hinata slapped the wall of silk beside her with a gentle storm strike that blew out a huge section of the webbing for them to continue the pursuit. Although Naruto left with a lingering backwards glance as she directed the same mix of elemental chakra through her feet as through her hands, blasting her way free as she snagged a kunai from the air and began deflecting the rest of the steel rain that poured from the surrounding area. It's the 6-armed one, she called out, and Kura, concealed behind a tree, nodded. Then something shot from the trees at a new angle, a gob of viscous fluid that slapped her hands together before hardening. With no chakra, the silken strands were not vulnerable to her technique, but she still held a sharp kunai. The spider-like Oto ninja watched closely as the girl kept moving, and as she sliced away the silk around her hands, he smirked. The other one was weaker, probably only a genin, while this one, he remembered what she'd done at the Chunin exams, and he was certain that she would be the greater threat. Grinning and silent, he activated his curse mark as he triggered the next trap. The silk ropes that lashed out from the trees this time were saturated in black chakra that resisted Hinata's attempts to cut it with the acquired kunai, and she was forced to wield the gentle storm to strike down and break these lines. The arrow that roared past her was barely deflected by her palm striking the shaft, and the friction of its passage burned a line across her palm as it hammered into the tree Kura was behind. The former Kumo Jinin seized his chance, and leaped out of cover, landing on the arrow with his feet crackling, and vanished from Kidomaru's sight as a large number of kunai and shuriken that were crafted from a harder version of this silk-like material thudded into the space he had been. Kidomaru was struggling to push himself to activate the second stage of his curse mark even as he heard a quiet voice, calm and imperturbable. Lightning step, Thunderbreaker. His last sight before he heard the crunch of separating vertebra was the thickly cushioned and reinforced knee pad on Kura's right knee. Afterwards, he wasn't really in a state to appreciate anything. Impressive move, Hinata panted. Her dodging and blocking had eaten away a good-sized portion of her chakra reserves. Why couldn't he dodge? Kura smiled. Lightning travels at roughly 150 kilometers per second, Hinata-san. By the time he'd thrown his weapons, it was already too late. Unfortunately, I have to have a conductive surface to cross, but his webs had to conduct his chakra, or your gentle storm would not have affected them. After that, it was a matter of opportunity. Did I do anything you would suggest be done differently? As Hinata shook her head, he checked on the Oto ninja, surprised to find him alive, if unconscious with his neck and spine broken. I can look after this one, Hinata-san. You go reinforce Shikamaru-san and Naruto-sama. Taiuya stood on the tree branch, her blood covering her right hand as she pushed herself into the second stage of her mark's power. Seeing the two shinobi chasing them, she slapped her palm against the branch, summoning the abominable monstrosities that were effectively her puppets as she lifted her flute to blow a shrill and discordant tune. When both ninja dropped, covering their ears in obvious signs of pain as the second one dispersed in a cloud of smoke, she paused, and the shadows flickered as Shikamaru slammed the butt of a kunai against her skull. Nodding to Naruto as he withdrew reels of ninja wire from his pouch, he began to secure the Oto Kunoichi. Tsunade looked over her reinforcing team. You are to reinforce and support the retrieval team. Now get going. Ino, Sakura, Kiba and Akamaru took off running, even as Shizune delivered the news of Choji's return with an injured Atome. Naruto struggled to his feet as the chase finally ran out of forest. Only a few miles north lay the Valley of the End, but Naruto wasn't about to let it get that far. He threw everything he had into catching the burdened Oto elite. Kimimaro seemed to realize this, and set down the tub, not noticing that the seals holding it contained had begun to smoke slightly. Enough, he said in his cold voice. My master demands that I return with this body for him, and I'll not let some pitiful shinobi child stop me from carrying out his wishes. The pale man reached up to his shoulders as two bones extended through the flesh, and pulled loose the bone swords from his own body, assuming a stance that spoke of kenjutsu expertise, even as Naruto raised a kunai in each hand, and charged. The initial clash was telling, with Naruto leaping back from the blades his foe wielded, with deep gouges in the metal of his kunai, and deep cuts to his forearms that were already beginning to heal. Well, that answers the question of whether it's the same guy or not, he thought, and hurled both kunai at the onrushing enemy, who deflected them both with the sword in his left hand. He paused a moment to stare at the boy in front of him. That was futile, he remarked. All you have managed is to throw away your only weapons. They would not have saved you, but they might have prolonged this. And now you face my blades. Naruto shrugged as his opponent closed the distance, slicing the next kunai, Naruto's last, in half. How do you do that? The Konoha ninja asked. Your swords are bone, and most bone isn't that strong. My Kekkei Genkai is the dead bone pulse, boy, Kimimaro sneered. It allows me to shape and extract my bones for this purpose, and there is no way for you to break them. The chakra that runs through me makes the bones as strong as tempered steel, making each bone the equivalent of a katana. You are doomed. Give up now and it shall be quick. He closed with a few spinning steps, almost dancing, and lashed out faster than Naruto could move, the sword in his right hand sweeping towards Naruto's neck faster than the young shinobi could react. Kura glanced up as the backup team reached him, drawn by the scent. Do you think we can stabilize this guy? He pointed at his unmoving prisoner, bound to a makeshift backboard with his own silk. He might know a few things. Ino nodded. Sakura, You and Kiba get going, I can handle this part. Turning to the prisoner, she smiled, an almost evil, almost certainly vicious, smirk. We don't want to lose any information he has before we get him back to Konoha if he dies, after all. She raised her hands. Yamanaka clan jutsu, mind walking. Hinata reached the edge of the forest, and immediately saw Naruto, even as the enemy shinobi swept his sword in the arc that was intended to decapitate her husband, and her heart skipped a few beats. If that man killed her Naru-kun, he would not survive long enough to do anything else, even should it kill her to do so. The sharp snap of bone called her attention back to the fight, rather than her vengeful thoughts. The broken piece of bone blade that spun away and dug, point down, into the open field drew her focus, but she saw the entire scene clearly. Kimimaro was surprised at the bone metal blade that had erupted from Naruto's shoulder to intercept his sword, snapping it clean at the point of impact. That shouldn't have happened. He didn't want to resort to the curse mark either. It would shorten his life too much, he would never survive it, and there was no one left to take the Uchiha boy to Orochimaru should he fall. He discarded the broken sword and returned the other as he leaped backwards, even as Naruto formed a blade on his other shoulder, as well as from each elbow and his kneecaps, with an armored bone metal mask forming about his brow and cheekbones, and plating spread across his forehead. Then the boy unsheathed his claws. What kind of monster are you? The Oto elite asked, a touch of fear rising in his voice. Naruto's answer was not comforting. The kind your master created trying to cure you, before discarding me to die as useless, never realizing what he'd done. I should have died. I didn't. Instead, I took that which was killing me, everything that had been done to me, and I refused to die. My bloodline kept me alive, and reached out for what it could use to help me survive, and remade me. And now, I choose not to be the monster your master proved himself to be, the one he would have made me, and did make you. If he's waiting for Sasuke, then he can wait until the stars burn down to ash. Kimimaro reached to the back of his neck, and with a terrible ratcheting sound, a grisly wrenching noise that seemed designed to inspire nausea, pulled out his own backbone. Naruto grinned. I guess I can't call you spineless at any rate. But are you sure that throwing away all those bones you keep pulling out is good for you? Even as he spoke, the younger shinobi was pushing wind and lightning chakra into the bone metal, and as his foe lashed out with the backbone like a whip, he jumped over it, as his shoulder blades grew the edged spines and his back sprouted its spikes. Kimimaro shifted direction and his spinal whip turned and struck upwards at the airborne blonde. Naruto drove an elbow blade through the bony lash, severing the top third of it, which scattered away in fragments. The rest of the whip, however, struck into his side, opening a long gash that bled freely. As he hissed, and the wound began to close, Naruto could feel some malaise, some illness, deep within the bone of the lash, trying to latch onto his own skeleton. But his Sekai Katsuyoku snuffed it out in seconds, particularly quickly as it was by no means his first exposure. He punched forwards with his claws, and Kimimaro attempted to catch at them with his ribcage only for the Arashi no Sume to cut through the bones as easily as they had done the tempered steel of a sword, and Naruto dragged the claws out the side of the Oto Nin's torso, scattering pieces of bone as he went. His back to the tub, Kimimaro realized he had no choice. He had to activate his curse mark and pray it lasted long enough for him to carry out his mission, or he'd die with that mission unfulfilled. As Sakura and Kiba, led by Akamaru, caught up with Hinata who stood at the edge of the field as if it were the hardest thing she'd ever done, the smoldering seals on the tub could no longer hold, and the wooden vessel exploded, with several large chunks of splintered wood piercing Kimimaro, whose stunned and impaled form inadvertently shielded Naruto, even as the Oto Nin died, his internal organs ruptured and failing. As he fell, Naruto noted a long splinter as thick around as his arm sticking out the back of his skull, at an angle that slipped past his skull and into his brain. But no one was paying more than passing attention to that. In the small crater left by the tub's explosion, stood what could only be Sasuke, but a Sasuke drowning in the unfiltered and concentrated black chakra of the curse mark, pouring off him in waves, killing the nearby grass as he opened his pure black eyes and screamed, a terrible sound of pain and rage. There was nothing but pain and anger in his existence. There hadn't been for a long time, longer than any would have believed possible. A constant shifting agony that burned away at the mind, tearing apart all positive thought. His teammates became tools rather than friends, friends became potential enemies, anyone who had something more than he became a real enemy, for taking what should have been his, and although he fought the change in his feelings, in his very self, he was losing. From desperation, he opened the Sharingan, and everything got worse. From the moment the paper bearing the seal breaker had made contact with the triple seal around the curse mark, it had been siphoning his chakra to fuel the destruction of those 3 seals, of any seal in fact, other than the ones Orochimaru had placed. So it was that Sasuke relived the memories of the night his brother had killed all his own clan, and a different perspective arose. A memory. Itachi was not as automatically trusted by his family and clan as everyone outside the Uchiha may have believed. Sasuke had been. The killing blows that had been delivered had been from someone they'd trusted, or the killer would not have gotten close. The Uchiha had been conspiring against the Hokage, to reclaim their rightful power and place as they saw it, and someone destroyed them in a single night. The rawest, most burningly agonizing realization hit Sasuke at this point. Itachi had not been in the Uchiha compound that night, he'd not set so much as a finger in the district that night in fact, but he'd still killed all of the Uchiha somehow, which meant he'd had to get someone else to do it for him. That person, whoever they were, had been little more than his tool, his weapon against his clan, and the reason he'd survived was not because his brother had been unable to kill him, but because of this very moment. It hadn't been Itachi who'd been slaughtering his clan, it had been Sasuke, his brother's puppet and stand-in. Of course he wouldn't have an effective weapon destroy itself. Orochimaru had developed the curse marks as a means to accomplish 2 goals. The first was to increase the power of the bearer, and all the power had to come from somewhere, so the mark converted potential lifespan into chakra, a prohibitively effective technique that vastly raised the bearer's abilities, potentially even to Jinchuriki levels, but to do so it ate away at their life at increasingly exorbitant cost. The imbalance then had a corrosive effect on the bearer's judgment and sanity, their sense of right and wrong. Darker deeds became simply a tiny price to pay as the mark progressed. The power of the Uchiha Sharingan had a similar effect if used too powerfully or for too long. The second goal was to lower the resistance and inhibitions of the mind bearing it, to make it easier for Orochimaru to take that body should he need to, or should the whim strike him. Together, these traits merged within the boy's body, tapping into all the rage and anguish, everything negative that Sasuke was only just beginning to overcome, and overwhelmed his fragile psyche. It was all he could do to hold onto a single memory, a single thought, a single ray of hope. Deep within all the fury and pain was a tiny core, an image of a girl with pink hair. As Kimimaro collapsed, dead as a doornail with the splintered chunks of the tub the Oto elite had their prisoner in, all the rage and anger of the boy, all the pain and anguish began to pour off him, burning the life from the grass around him to fuel the black chakra flames that roiled and danced about his form. His eyes, pure black, swept over the area around him as he turned, and seeing someone who had a power that should have been his, attacked. Naruto barely avoided the attack, a stream of black lightning that tore up the ground where he'd been standing, and the stray ribbon of power brushed against his arm, tearing it open in a gout of gore as he was flung end over end towards the tree line. He glanced at the injury to assess the damage, noting idly that the wound did not seem to be closing. As if the chakra that would have gone to healing the injury were burned out or blocked. That can't be a good sign, he thought as the dark Sasuke charged, and closed the distance as Naruto kicked back to his feet. As Hinata appeared and lashed out with gentle fist strikes, which had no effect, and gentle storm, with the same result, the dark Sasuke reached out for Naruto. As her husband was attacked, Hinata had raced in to intercept Sasuke, and the 2 shinobi she'd left to watch took a second to glance at each other, as Akamaru whimpered and cowered deeper into Kiba's jacket. Akamaru's in no shape to help them, Sakura, and I'm not good enough to beat Sasuke when he's holding back, the Inuzuka said to his teammate. We'll go for more help, you back up those 2 and try to stop him, or at least keep him in place. As Kiba dashed back along their trail, hoping he'd find someone who could help, Sakura raced towards the fight. The black flames scared her, even more so when she realized even Naruto wasn't healing as fast as he usually did. Normally you could see the injuries healing before your eyes, and although the blonde's wounds were closing, it seemed a long and drawn-out process compared to his usual gone before he realized he'd been hurt pace. Despite the protection of the chakra used in her fighting style, Hinata's palms had been a little scorched by the black flames surrounding Sasuke. Flames that had been devouring her chakra as fuel until she deliberately shut off the flow of it for a few moments. Naruto hammered into Sasuke from the side, bone metal plating his striking surfaces, knuckles, knees and elbows, having drawn in his claws in order to pummel some sense into his fellow shinobi. The black flames hurt, and tried to consume the blue energy of his chakra. It was getting painful to maintain conflict as the two traded blows, and Hinata fell back a little, breathing hard, as Sakura leaped past her and lashed her hand into the opening created when Naruto landed a knee strike to intercept Sasuke's flame-covered fist, catching the attack with her hand and stopping the attack cold long enough for the blonde shinobi to force the Uchiha back. The sting and burning sensation in her palm, however, were not due to her hand catching fire. As Sakura stared for a moment at her unmarked palm, she began to think, both faster and harder than she ever had before. She had not been the top-graded kunoichi because of her actual shinobi skills, but because her academics had been nearly off the charts. Naruto's attacks were striking the black chakra and being absorbed, like the kick he performed now, with his bone metal-plated heel. It should have broken Sasuke's jaw, and driven the Sharingan user's momentum sideways across a fair distance, but Sasuke barely noticed it, and Naruto was getting burned as he did. Hinata had similar problems, and the two of them were acting like partners should in every single assault they launched. None of it was working, and Sakura came to the realization that they couldn't stop Sasuke. These black chakra flames weren't going to let them hit effectively. Ignoring the hiss of burning flesh, and the smoky smell that lay siege to her senses, instead wondering how Naruto, with his far more sensitive senses, was managing to keep going, Hinata got a grip on Sasuke's left arm. It was his weak arm, but she found herself hard-pressed, and wished that ninja wire would have helped, or even that she had some with her. The sudden jerk as Sasuke stopped in his tracks startled her. Naruto had apparently had a similar train of thought as he'd pulled off a virtual mirror image maneuver, and he did have ninja wire, and he spooled it about the Uchiha's wrists, where it promptly began to heat up even as he anchored it in kunai that he hurled to the trees, the wire proceeding slowly up the spectrum through reds of brighter hues, approaching yellow quickly as Sasuke, who had yet to make a coherent sound other than grunts and roars, struggled and strained against his bonds. It surprised the both of them when Sakura simply walked up to Sasuke and wrapped her arms around him, unharmed by the black fires flaring from his flesh, planting a solid and very real kiss on the lips of her crush, shocking him into immobility. Pulling back with a murmured, "I'm sorry," she looked into his eyes, and saw the pain and agony, the unequaled morass of despair and fury that it was impossible to bear without breaking. She saw his eyes, the red Tomoe-marked Sharingan eyes, as he croaked out in a shattered voice. "Forgive. You. Gotta be stopped, before I kill someone." He swallowed with difficulty, fighting back the impossible tide of every negative thing in his life, holding it all at bay with the one shining moment, one that was deteriorating now that the black flames of the curse mark knew what to destroy. "Thank you, Sakura." Then his eyes went totally black once more as Sakura raised her hand, sheathed in chakra, and then, with tears pouring down her face so hard that she could not see anything, shattered her own heart by driving her fist through his. The detonation of chakra did not go unnoticed, and the backup teams from Konoha that had been mustered and dispatched as soon as they became available raced through the trees. It was Kakashi who found them first, although he was soon joined by others, Guy, then Anko, then more. Sasuke's body had been badly damaged by the black flames, and was barely recognizable. Sakura was unresponsive. Her right arm was gone, burned away to ash in an instant, all the way to her shoulder. Her eyes didn't focus right, and the initial diagnosis, by Shizune, leading the first medic nin team to arrive, was of shock-induced catatonia. In comparison, Hinata and Naruto got off extremely lightly, although they were rendered unconscious, with mere burns. Burns that were slowly mending as the two were entangled, Hinata in her husband's arms as the Jinchuriki had apparently shielded her. The worrisome thing about that was the threads of Yuki that danced between the two, repairing the injuries that were somehow devoid of the regular blue chakra that all living things contained. This was a very strange, and very dangerous situation, and they had to get everyone back to Konoha, as soon as possible. Orochimaru was gritting his teeth, only barely containing his anger as he watched the vast number of Konoha shinobi going over the ground where the fight had taken place. Fed up with waiting, his impatience was a factor in his many failed experiments, too, not that he'd admit to any form of imperfection. The renegade Sannin had slipped through the Valley of the End and located the site of the battle, but he found it far too late. The shinobi had already taken away the bodies and survivors from the fight that Orochimaru could see signs of still scored into the landscape around them. He again restrained his destructive impulse. It wasn't worth it to lash out with no real reward here, risking capture if any of these shinobi were stronger than they looked, and began to slip away. He needed more information. None of the 3 survivors of the battle against Sasuke were waking up, Tsunade noted. Looking over the charts and reports, she saw that Sakura's problem was not physical in nature, despite the injury that had taken her arm. Even now Yamanaka Inoichi was attempting to gently sift through the girl's scattered memories. His report of the fight was stark, and as regards the pink-haired girl's mind. She's hiding, Tsunade-sama, the Yamanaka head explained. It wasn't so much the shock of her arm being destroyed, as it was her realization that Sasuke was already too far broken and had to be stopped, and that as powerful and strong as Naruto and Hinata had become, they weren't able to do it, while she was, and had to. He sighed, knowing the minefield he was about to walk into. I'd imagine that you had a similar episode after. Dan. Tsunade's glare snapped up and locked onto the Mindwalker's face. That's none. She paused a moment, then collapsed back into a chair as she looked at the young Kunoichi. No. She sighed. You're right. What repercussions can you see from this? If she recovers from the emotional trauma of having to kill her own teammate, the boy she may well have loved, and who apparently thought enough of her that she was the only one he'd ever let in, you mean? The blonde Junin shrugged. All she really has left is being a shinobi. Her father's working on the police force here, and her mother's on the council representing the clanless shinobi, but neither one will ever fully understand what she's going through. I'd suggest keeping her as Kakashi's Junin. He'll understand what she's going through, like no one else ever will, and probably assigning them to some minor ambassadorial duties for a while. If Danzo managed council duties with one arm, she should manage at least assistance duties. If there was some sort of prosthetic for her, that would probably help her out, too. I'd not try to disguise it though. If she were to associate it with her old arm, she may well do herself an injury. He shook his head. That's all. If, mind you. As for when, I have no idea. I don't even know if she'll remember it. The Hokage nodded, and she put on the hat, the only one spoken of thus in the village. Anyone could have a hat. The Hokage wore the hat, and left the room. 3 doors down she came to another room. Jiraiya, Shizune, she spoke to the 2 experts who watched over the room's 2 occupants, in the one bed. A report and some tea, please. As her former apprentice made the tea, Jiraiya began. It's Yuki, all right, the pure stuff, too. The thing is, his seal is locked down tight. The way it's designed, this stuff can't be, the fox's chakra, but it has to be, there's no other explanation. It seems to be acting in some unique way, and I have no idea how. It's almost as if Naruto himself was guiding this energy in whatever it's doing, but he's unconscious, so that can't be it. Shizune handed over the teacup, which had a single stalk floating upright in it. As Tsunade blinked at the omen, the medic Nin carried on from where Jiraiya had left off. Their wounds are healing slowly, and being specifically targeted by the Yuki to be rebuilt, it's the only way to explain it, but there may be side effects we can't predict. Whatever those black flames were, they would consume the chakra within a living thing to fuel themselves, but in the case of Uchiha Sasuke, and I suspect anyone in his situation, it seems to burn through the potential chakra first. When I examined the body, all the potential lifespan was burned out by the black chakra. That gave Jiraiya-sama some ideas about the function of the seal, which may allow us to remove the one on Matarashi Anko. Turning back to the beds, she pointed to their burns, which were, even as they watched, visibly recovering. Our techniques and medical jutsu were useless. They need a chakra system to work with. The black chakra burns out that system. What's happening here? It looks like their systems are being rebuilt by Yuki, and there's something else, something we just can't understand. Shaking her head, she gestured for the Toad Sage to take up the reins of the conversation. Since Jiraiya seemed reluctant, Tsunade decided to prod for information. Does this have to do with why they're in the same bed? Nightmares again? She could handle nightmares, she thought, but the spy master was shaking his head. I wish it was nightmares, but the truth is, if Hinata is taken from the Gaki's arms, she starts to crash. Her vitals drop, and she starts to die. It looks like toxic chakra shock, but faster. As Tsunade stared, Shizune finished her report. It's almost like she's become dependent on the Yuki to live, she said, but unlike Naruto and his passenger, she doesn't generate Yuki herself. We, and I use that term collectively about all the medics and doctors here except maybe you, have no idea where to even start to deal with this. Atome sat in the wheelchair as Choji and Ino guided her down the corridors. The main Uzumaki bloodline was still present in the Hyaku Hoseki line, but the something extra they had was settled into the skin of stone. The more rapid healing from the Katsuyoku, only Naruto had the supercharged version. The Sakai Katsuyoku meant that she was only going to be off this leg for a couple of weeks, although in an emergency she could be healed quicker. But her state at the time of injury had exacerbated the break, and the doctors recommended she allow it to heal naturally. To say that she was not best pleased at this turn of events was understating the case. Naruto and Hinata were still in this sleep. It had been 3 days and everyone else was debriefed and brought up to date on the situation. While the mission had technically failed, the target they were sent to rescue dying in the course of the mission, it was emphasized that this was no one's fault, except the man who'd placed that curse mark in the first place. The analysis of the mission and the after-action reports, as well as mental health assessments for all involved, were all dealt with swiftly, and everyone besides the Uzumakis and Sakura had been sent home. Kiba was temporarily placed on Team 10 for missions, but Shinji-sensei had no problems with that. Kiba had taken one look at the man's smirk and gulped. Ishiguma was waiting outside the hospital as his daughter and her friends emerged. As they reached him, he spoke. "I heard about a strange new maneuver," he said, causing both his daughter and the young Akamichi to stiffen. "This Uzumaki combination may be a good idea, but obviously we will need more than one such option to make it a true path. And we will have to work on the theories behind it to eliminate such a cost as it currently has." His gesture took in her leg, plastered from hip to toes. "But this Akamichi catapult, most effective and impressive. I am proud." Choji and Ino seemed about to verbally protest the mild way this was said, when Atome placed a hand on the hand of each nearest her. "This is my father," she explained as they hesitated. "This is his equivalent of Naruto-sama's wildest cheers and exhortations, with a parade down the center of the village for good measure." Bowing as best she could in her current condition, she replied to her father. "I thank you for your attention, Otu-sensei. You honor me." Ishiguma wasn't a man for big emotional displays, so the hug both surprised and confused her. "No, beloved daughter, you honor me," he replied. "My greatest desire is that one day, not too far off I think, I might be proud to be known as your father." This was a first, even for Kurama. Not once in his 1,000 years of existence, although he grudgingly admitted to himself that in this case, he was uncertain of the exact span of his years, so 1,000 years simply meant a very long time, had one of his hosts managed to bring someone else into their mindscape, while they were both unconscious. When they'd appeared, he could see the damage they'd both taken, and it was terrible. The girl, his host's mate, for Naruto's scent was all over her in such a way that there was no other possible interpretation, was badly hurt, almost as though something had seared away the very pathways of her chakra network. From what he could tell, the same was happening to Naruto, and even as he watched, he'd seen the damage slowly, oh so slowly, spreading, in both of them. Sighing, the fox looked at the boy, the young man he corrected himself, to whom he'd actually given his name. Under the direction of the two chakra presences, as long as they'd lasted, the power of the Kyuubi no Yoko had been wielded for a purpose other than destruction. It had felt odd, very odd, but somehow it had been far more satisfying to build the boy up than the many deaths and vast swaths of destruction the Biju had caused over his long, long life. He sighed again as he looked at the damage. He could repair the boy, and make him immune, and indeed, he'd been doing so. He'd also done the same things to the girl, Hinata. He'd even managed to iron out the discrepancy between his chakra and her own, but there was something else wrong, something he'd not foreseen. Once he'd reached a certain point as he rebuilt her system, that very system became dependent on the very Yuki repairing it. If she was to live, he would have to give her some way to produce her own Yuki, whether by sealing another Biju or lesser demon into her, which the Gaki would never forgive him for, or by changing them both, making them into either full or half-blooded demons. It was tempting to push it far enough to make them demons, a sort of celestial get-out-of-jail-free card, as full demons could not contain other full demons without one devouring the other. But that would leave him weak and vulnerable to the one who'd manipulated him into attacking Konoha twice, and that was not an acceptable outcome. So he brought them closer, dragging him next to the bars of his cage as he began to shift what the Yuki was doing. If he wasn't careful, they'd wind up full Kitsune, and that would definitely give the game away. The first time he'd done this had taken enough Yuki to put him to sleep for 3 years. This would take significantly more. Unconscious in the private room, where Shizune slumbered nearby, ready to act if they woke, Naruto's hand moved, and the Yuki that trailed behind it began to paint a seal on Hinata's belly. Shino arrived at the hospital to visit his teammates, Kurenai-sensei and Anko with him, where Tsunade met them at the doors. The council had decided that, on reflection, the purple-haired special jonin was never, not ever, permitted to teach or lecture at the academy again. Since this had been part of what the woman had been aiming to accomplish, she was happy. The rest was to further the legend of Anko, which seemed devoted more to terrifying small children, and not so small. There were more than 50 full-grown men and women who had nightmares about the kunoichi and her snakes, than about any actual deeds. One of the children, an obnoxious civilian child, apple of his father's eye, obviously, had spat when Anko told him to collect the group's water. "I don't have to listen to my own mother," he'd said, "so why should I listen to you?" Anko's sadistic smirk had nearly broken the brat on its own, but her follow-up speech finished it. "Because your parents aren't here to stop me putting snakes in your bed." The boy had been a proper angel for the rest of the trip. By the time they'd returned, the whole rescue mission had been over with for the past few days, and they'd decided to all come in at the same time. Actually, Anko was likely only here because Tsunade had ordered her down here to talk with Jiraiya, something about new information on the effects of the curse mark, and the possible method of removing it. The jonin had been embarrassingly enthusiastic. "If he can get this off me," she'd announced, "I'd have his baby." Then she'd realized exactly what she'd said, and death threats were issued to all in the room. A laughing Tsunade had nodded, calling it an S-rank secret, to make her feel better. They knocked on the door, more to be polite than in hopes of their friends being awake, and heard Shizune as she startled. The door then opened and the 4 of them entered, only to freeze at the sight before them. By and large, the couple in the bed were the same as they'd always been, but Shino's Kakaichi were telling him something was different. The young Aburame had figured that much out the second he saw the whisker marks on Hinata's cheeks, perfectly matching those on her husband's, the black, hard nails, so much like animals' claws, and the pointed, fox-like ears they both had in place of the ones they'd had last night. Tsunade broke the silence. This could be quite a problem. Hinata stretched a little as she woke, a familiar warmth against her. She opened her eyes and saw the Hokage standing there, with Kurenai, Shizune and Shino, staring at her. Wondering what was going on, she reached up with her hand to rub her eyes free of sleep and stopped. The difference between her fingernails during the fight with Sasuke and now was significant. Solid black, more firmly anchored, and more rounded than flat, they resembled nothing more than claws, such as you'd find on a dog or a wolf, or a fox. Glancing down at Naruto's hand where it rested on her belly, she saw the same thing, a fact that laid her ears back. Reaching up, she felt at the pointed, red-furred ears on each side of her head as she twisted around to look at Naruto's face. This in turn woke her husband, who began to rub at his still shut eyes, his ears, identical to hers, allowing for the size differences between them, drooping a little, displaying the black tips she was now certain adorned her own ears as well. It was the opening of his eyes that made her gasp, just a little. The color of the blonde Jinchuriki's eyes was unchanged, but their shape, that had definitely changed. The cat-like slit pupil of a fox's eyes was there, plain to see, and his eyes met hers and she caught a glimpse of her own eyes. Save for only the color, a rich amethyst shade, her eyes were the same. In a moment of panic, without thinking of their company, Hinata thrust her left hand into the waistband on Naruto's shorts, sighing in relief when she failed to find a foxtail, and squeezing her husband close, until Kurenai cleared her throat, reminding the young shinobi couple that they weren't alone, bringing a fierce blush to both of their faces. Ino stepped through the doors, returning to Sakura's room after helping her teammate Atome leave the hospital. The pink-haired girl was still her friend, despite the rivalry they'd had over Sasuke, and Ino had a vast degree of sympathy for Sakura, even if their mutual crush had started to notice his teammate a little more. The mental trauma of seeing him die would have been truly awful. Although Ino had thought Sakura was a little stronger than this. What had happened to him that it did this to her? The blonde carefully fed her catatonic friend, who dutifully and automatically ate what was placed in her mouth. Ino had thought the cesspool in Kidomaru's mind was bad enough, but even as she dragged the memories of the six-armed man from his mind, she'd been insulated to a large degree by the training her father had given her, and Sakura had no such release valve. Ino wished she could do something for Sakura other than wait, but for now, that's all she could do. Still, the dull, almost lifeless gaze of the pink-haired Kunoichi was worrying her blonde friend, and Ino was not the type to sit still. The panic that the Uzumaki couple felt at finding their new changes was fleeting, and Naruto, for one, thought the whisker marks on Hinata's face to be adorable. Distractingly so, in fact. The various medical procedures to determine what was happening were apparently insufficient, as all Tsunade and Shizune could detect was that the two of them were in fine form and ready to fight. But their transformation, as minor as it seemed, was totally unexpected. Hinata was found to have a similar increase to her senses and healing rate to Naruto's, as if someone had managed to transplant his bloodline limit into her. Almost a limit breaker, if you would have it so. A moment's experimentation revealed her to still have the Byakugan, but the change to her eyes was reflected here by the entire eye becoming that vivid amethyst purple. It looks like both of you have already made a full recovery, which was worrying me, Tsunade told them. Large sections of the chakra network in Hinata's hand and arms and legs, and the same for you Naruto, had been burned away, is the best way I can describe it. Because the chakra coils were destroyed, the chakra flow wasn't getting where it had to go, so there was no healing, either naturally or through jutsu, that we could assist with. Worse, it was slowly eating away at you, spreading the damage. The only thing that stopped it was the Yuki of the Kyuubi, and we have no idea how he managed to do any of this. He would have to have rebuilt a lot of your chakra networks from scratch. We could actually see that happening at the time. She sipped at the cup of tea Shizune had supplied. Jiraiya took the chance to speak. What worried us then was the way the two of you seemed to need the Yuki to survive. Since Naruto has the fox in his seal, we weren't as concerned for him, but as far as we knew, Hinata had no such resource to draw upon. He looked him up and down. But what's happened is something I never would have expected in longer than the Kyuubi no Yoko has existed. He met the curious gazes squarely. It seems, in order to give you two the ability to survive the reconstruction of your chakra networks, the Kyuubi has pretty much given you the ability to generate your own Yuki, although exactly what you can do with it is completely unknown. But the side effects. Your chakra reserves have increased, both of you, and in general your chakra is more potent. Physically, you'll be a bit stronger and faster, tougher too, but you'll have to get used to it. There's a serious downside to it all, though. The physical changes are obvious if you're looking at them, and while you're more powerful, there's a lot of seals in certain places that the two of you simply can't go anymore. Shrines and temples, especially. So you're saying we aren't human any longer? Naruto asked, a catch in his voice. Hinata wrapped her arms around him as they waited for Tsunade's verdict. PFFT. Of course you're still human, the Hokage said. If anything, you're more than human, but the human part is there, because we can still see Naruto and Hinata. The ears and eyes are going to take some getting used to though. It could be worse, Naruto remarked. We could have woken up with tails. She opened her eyes to a full color view, unlike the dull gray that had coated the world for so long. Looking down, she saw the long blonde ponytail of Ino, and the dish of pudding that the other girl had fed her, apparently, as Ino had no signs of eating it herself on her. She went to reach out to shake her friend's shoulder, and froze. Where did my arm go? She thought frantically, almost panicked by the loss. The shoulder was sensitive and tender, but the ghostly sensation that her real arm should be there, her hand flexing in front of her, was almost agonizing. A memory flickered, of a flare of black fire that turned white as she pulled her hand back from. Her mind refused to go any further, and there was a foggy blur in front of whatever had happened. Gritting her teeth, she poked and prodded at her memory, managing to lift the edges of the fog and peer underneath. Her scream of pain and despair woke Ino, who was up instantly and holding her best friend close as she cried, huge racking sobs. From her mother's explanations as a therapist, this was a good sign, especially as the pink-haired girl was now able to focus, wrapping her only arm around her friend as she cried herself out. Sorry, Ino, Sakura mumbled, right on the edge of hearing. I don't deserve a friend like you, or Kiba, or even Naruto. It was all me. Sakura, it's all right, the blonde said, puzzled by her friend's words, but determined to be supportive. All the enemy ninja are dead or captured, so there'll be justice for whoever killed Sasuke, you wait and see. As Sakura stiffened at her words, Ino wondered why, pulling back to see the fear-stricken look on the other girl's face. Sakura had frozen up. Ino didn't know. She didn't even suspect it was a possibility. The one-armed girl drew in a sob. I can't say it, Ino, she mumbled, her voice a little croaky from disuse. You better step inside and see it for yourself. She pointed at her forehead, then remembered her missing right hand and pointed again with her left, wondering if she'd ever get used to that, as Ino performed the hand seals to mind walk. Naruto's henge jutsu proved to be enough to conceal their fox-like features. Even Hinata's Byakugan couldn't see through the transformation, which was a major clue right there. A little investigation showed the transformation to be an actual physical, if only cosmetic, change. Hinata's own change was the same, too, as if their new bodies were playing along with the appearance they wanted to project. Well, that's one new talent you've discovered, Jiraiya said as he walked them home. There were angry glares here and there directed at Naruto as they passed, and although Jiraiya's glare was enough to make the handful of hostile civilians back down, Naruto was forced to wonder what was going on. Jiraiya refused to explain until they were under the Uzumaki roof. They stopped as they passed Ichiraku's and Naruto glanced to Hinata, who rolled her eyes then nodded. As they sat to order, Ayami and Chuchi seemed to brighten up at the sight of their favorite customer, and his bulging wallet. Ino pulled back from her friend's memories, shocked, horrified and furious about what Sakura had done. She'd known that Sasuke was dead, there was no one who didn't in Konoha, but like many people had assumed it to be the hand of Naruto that had done the deed. Learning that it had been Sakura had brought those three emotions to the fore. But her father had always said for her to look twice at everything. Shock and horror were understandable, she supposed, as finding that Sakura was the only one who could do the deed was a terrible fact. Ino doubted she could have brought herself to do it. The anger was not, somewhat surprisingly, directed at Sakura, as she would have thought, but at the universe in general, for forcing the pink-haired girl's first kill to be the one person she would have died to protect, her first love. It was so unfair, and the tears that sprang to the blonde's eyes as she hugged her friend to her were as much for Sakura as for Sasuke. Sakura looked on the loss of her arm as a fair price to pay, since she doubted she'd ever be able to look at the hand that had killed Sasuke without feeling the urge to have it not be part of her, to remove it. Even if it meant the end of her career as a shinobi, not something she looked forward to, it showed everyone that she was willing to sacrifice herself for the village. As she finally drifted into a true and healthy slumber, held close by her best friend, who mourned with her, she idly wondered who would be telling her it was all over. It was here that Tsunade found the pair, Ino cradling her friend gently as the Hokage entered. On seeing the sleeping Sakura, the old woman smiled. Nodding to Ino as Kakashi and Kiba joined them, Tsunade waited as the young kunoichi woke her friend. The dejected Sakura looked up at the Hokage and wilted. At least it showed that they valued her loss. It seems obvious to me, the Godava Hokage said, that Team 7 has struck a major problem. You are down one member, and we'll have to take care of that soon, and another has suffered both physical and emotional injuries that will take time to deal with. I have two options I can pursue here. The first, and frankly least palatable, is that I disband Team 7. Sakura's heart sank. She'd been right, she knew it, but that would be spitting on the sacrifices that the members of that team have made. So I am pursuing the second option. As of now, the two surviving members of Team 7 are given field promotion to Chunin on my authority as the one under the hat. Sakura's gaze snapped up and locked onto Tsunade's face as she spoke, a wild, unbelievable hope coursing through her, as the Hokage continued. Further, I am ordering Jonin Hitaki Kakashi and the two Chunin of his team, together with Chunin Nara Shikamaru, to undertake the first diplomatic inspections of Sunagakure no Sato to maintain their treaty with us. While there, they are to seek out means, resources and training for Chunin Haruno Sakura such that would restore her to full duties as a kunoichi of Konoha. I recommend speaking with Suna's puppet master Core, as Sakura's incredible chakra control, and the phantom feelings of her missing arm, may permit a form of prosthetic to work. I believe it's worth looking into. The others all filed out, and Ino waved to her friend as she left, promising to return the next day. Tsunade was the last in the line, and paused as Sakura spoke, soft and hesitant. No. Hokage-sama, why so much for just one kunoichi? She asked, uncertainty and self-doubt plaguing her. The Hokage smiled as she looked over her shoulder. Because when it comes down to it, The big picture that everyone keeps telling me to look at, it's made up of lots of little ones. People keep forgetting that. The addition of the Crimson Yuki to Naruto and Hinata's systems created a few discrepancies. For one, the violet chakra that resulted was more potent than the blue chakra of the average shinobi. It was more concentrated, if that was the word, and the couple needed to refine their chakra control again, to deal with the changes. Luckily their elemental affinities remained the same, but they had to start from scratch, relearning most of their jutsu all over again, mastering again the skills they once wielded so easily. Was it really only a week or so gone? Hinata found that she could perform a Rasengan, but only once. The resources required for it to be effective pretty close to drained her chakra reserves, even if they were growing. Maybe in 5 or 10 years she could master it, but until then she decided she would rather perfect the gentle storm. Even there she had a whole slew of new problems, as the Yuki in her chakra caused the output of her strikes to fluctuate, as the sheer number of training posts she reduced to splinters could attest. Naruto's problems were similar in nature, if not in scope. As the Jinchuriki and host of the Kyuubi, he was scrutinized closely by Jiraiya, inspecting the seal on his belly especially, finding that Naruto's own Yuki was gently picking away at the seal. All he could do was repair the seal, a patch job he was unhappy about. Given that the Kyuubi was dormant for some reason the Toad Sage could not even guess it, he was unsure exactly how long the seal would hold. Naruto, be careful, he warned the young man. I believe it will hold for the next 10 years, and if I can manage to patch it often enough, I can maybe stretch that out by an extra year or 3, but someday, it's going to fail. When that happens, the fox will be free. The original design of the seal bound your lives together, but with your changes. I just don't know. The only place that might have the information I need is the great library of Uzushiogakure in Uzu no Kuni. It probably won't be there now, but I can start to track it down. Much as I might want to take you along, I can't take you both as you are. You just don't have the control you need. But I'll move as fast as I can to get the books I need and get back here. I'll see you when I return. Sarutobi Hiruzen sat in the park, watching as the academy students began debating over the lecture he'd just given on the management of the village. The things a child could see clearly that adults overlooked sometimes overwhelmed him. Even as his grandson and his friends started asking about the sanctity of the clan's autonomy, and the limits that were placed upon it, others in the class discussed how and why new clans formed and old ones were lost or restored. The importance of bloodlines and Kekkei Genkai was also raised and talked to death. Clearing his throat, the professor, as the former Hokage was still known, reclaimed the eager attention of the future shinobi. There is no perfect system of government, he said. But as a young Chunin has been heard to say, perfection is stagnation. We must always seek to better ourselves and the world around us, not for ourselves, but for those who come after us, that they might dwell in a better world than we did. He loved teaching. The cell that Danzo had occupied for the last few months was designed to hold powerful shinobi, with seals built inside the walls to drain away any focused chakra, keeping the occupant from using any jutsu, or bloodline limits. The only good thing about it was that everyone save a handful selected when the cells were constructed had the same problem. It was a comforting thought to the old warhawk, until he discovered that Jiraiya and Tsunade were both among that handful. The slug Sanon's examination of him quickly found what he'd kept hidden since the Uchiha massacre, the reason his personal power had received a sudden upswing at that time, the stolen eyes of the dead Uchiha, and the purloined cells of the Shodemi Hokage. In his arm and eye socket. The removal of these ill-gotten gains had been without the benefit of anesthetic, and quite painfully done, too. Now Danzo really was as he looked, a one-eyed, one-armed man, a cripple who had once been a shinobi. Jiraiya had taken a large sampling of Danzo's blood, too, likely to unburden those that had been sealed to root, and thus to Danzo. All in all, the losses and setbacks he'd suffered meant that Danzo would never be the one to lead Konoha to supremacy over the world. That his village seemed to be getting so strong with such weakened methods had told him that his methods would allow him to conquer the world, and prove to the Raikage that Konoha was far superior to his thieving little pit in the mountains. Unfortunately, he was the only one who could see that, and now the very village he'd sacrificed so many to serve, not himself, of course, that would be asking too much, he couldn't lead the village if he was dead, could he now? Was sentencing him to a traitor's fate, all because he saw a weapon that was loose and tried to control it. Danzo's mind did not have a one-to-one connection with reality. That much was easy to see, especially for the figure that looked in at the door, then disappeared again, only to reappear in front of a spiral masked man in a black cloak with red clouds on it. It would seem that Danzu's have all been taken and destroyed, sir, the scout said. Even the one in his head. Other than your own, I doubt there are any viable Sharingan eyes left in the elemental nations. Dismissing the spy, the Akatsuki member known as Toby snarled. The only Sharingan left were his own and Kakashi's, which threw a very great wrench into his plans. His own eye was insufficient, and he would have needed either Itachi or Sasuke's eyes to succeed. Now, with no Uchiha, he would have to find another way to start again. Fortunately, there was a perfect, ready-made puppet in the Sandaime Raikage, angry and irrational, just begging to be used. Tsunade looked over the medical reports of her favorite couple, and compared them to the reports on the two ex-Kumo Jinchuriki in Konoha. She hadn't publicized their identities, but the Raikage had listed them as such in the Kumo bingo books, after refusing to retract the prices on Team Kurenai's heads. Each of the diplomats had been listed as traitors to Kumo, backdated to the time of the Chunin exams. Not even the Tsuchikage in Iwa, who'd sent Tsunade a copy of the publication with a note that read, "Looks like all that comes out of Kumo is thunderstorms and fiction," was placing any faith in the old man running that village. The Raikage seemed to have developed some serious blind spots in his worldview, not unlike the village council had, now that Tsunade thought of it. Looking up at the massive form of A, she began to speak. All of you are in perfect health, it seems, she said, laying the papers back down on the desk. B and Yugito are showing none of the signs of instability that were evident in Gaara, so their seals seem to be doing an excellent job. Now, since you asked for political asylum until the situation in Kumo can be resolved, I've assigned you a local escort, some Genin who understand the customs of your village and their Jonin sensei. They may seem familiar to you, and they are free to discuss with you their reasons for choosing the Leaf Part-8 if they wish. One of them in particular is of much interest to us, both for his gift at strategy and his unusual Kekkei Genkai, something we have dubbed his five-fold mind. You'll be accommodated with the team and their sensei as well, and I hope you can get along with them. A nodded. He'd never expected this outcome from the way the relations between Konoha and Kumo were strained due to the first Hyuga incident. After the second one, which the team had flatly decided was a suicide mission meant to dispose of them and refused to do, thankfully, and the problems with the bingo books, it had become obvious that the Raikage was not playing with the full deck. It looked like all the 5s and 10s were missing, and that remaining a Kumo nin was an iffy proposition at best. A shinobi expected to be expendable, but they at least wanted to be spent for a purpose, not discarded on a mad scheme guaranteed to fail. Thank you, Hokage-sama, the dark-skinned ninja said. My team and I will discuss your counter-proposal and return our decision to you. For himself, he would have loved to go back to Kumo and set everything right by force if needed, but his little brother and the girl as good as his sister had seen the way Konoha's Jinchuriki was treated now, despite the stories of his childhood and the abduction, and he wanted that equality, that indefinable quality of life that seemed so elusive for the people who were demon prisons, for them. It wasn't a decision to reach in a day. Naruto looked at the two seals he placed on the wall, the one to bind mortal chakra, the other to hold back Yuki. They were simple things, a common seal in intermediate Fuinjutsu, intended for prisons and secure rooms to keep ninjutsu and summonings, and genjutsu, he realized, from manifesting within the seal's confines. As Hinata and he began the self-imposed training, switching which seal they targeted each hour, they strove to break through the seals, by separating their chakra into the blue chakra and the red Yuki. It was to this scene that Kurenai arrived in their courtyard, just as Hinata succeeded at breaking through the demon energy seal, producing a blue flare across her new whisker marks as she did. Naruto broke the other seal with a similar flare in red a few moments later. They were happy with their efforts, somewhat, but felt they had taken too long. 5 minutes in a fight could be lethal. But it was a skill that could only improve with time and practice. The Hokage has sent for us, and Shino will meet us there, she told them, and as they worked the jutsu to conceal their new features, she sighed. They weren't quite 14 yet, and they'd been forced to grow up so fast, but then again, the changes they'd engendered in the village had been vast. Sure, some of those were at third hand, but the bolstering of their shinobi ranks and the alliances with Shio and Suna, as well as the grudging yet respectful truce with Iwa, were almost directly the results of the actions of her team, something to be proud of as they outgrew her. Maybe she should step up for another team this year at the academy. The atmosphere in Tsunada's office was tense, and the members of Team Kurenai glanced around carefully. The occupants were their team, the Hokage herself, Sarutobi Hiruzen as her advisor, Shizune to represent the hospital, Ishiguma for the Uzumaki seat on the council, and finally the red-headed girl from the Oto elite, albeit grumbling and reluctant. Shizune led off without hesitation. A blood test and genetic workup has produced unexpected results. Naruto-sama, she started, emphasizing the suffix to his name. Combined with further interrogation and intelligence, we believe we have enough to put together a mission, one that has repercussions for your clan as a whole. We have found that this young woman is one of your clan. Genetically, she's an Uzumaki, a survivor of Uzushiogakure. Jiraiya has successfully removed Orochimaru's curse mark from her, and is even now removing Matarashi Anko's. We have released her into Ishiguma's custody and training. Your mission is B rank, with a possibility of escalation to A or maybe even S rank, depending on exactly which shinobi you encounter. Tsunade rose from behind the desk. Teiya's sister is secluded at one of Orochimaru's southern bases, and we believe that part of his research is an attempt to duplicate the Uzumaki Kekkei Genkai. Your mission is to rescue Uzumaki Karen, destroy any samples that Orochimaru may possess, along with any research notes, and deny him the resources of this base. Reduce it to ash and salt the earth, Naruto-san. Shino, Kurenai and the Uzumaki couple glanced at each other, and Naruto smiled. As you command, Hokage-sama, the young clan head replied. Old Snake Lips will never know what hit him.